My husband and I own this property. I am the chief steward, so I'm the one with the chainsaw and the herbicide, and I'm getting a lot of help from Booker Moritz, who is also with SGI, and he has been really, really instrumental in helping me advance the restorations, which you guys will see. I know the really important stuff are the bathrooms. There are 2 of them. There is one, if you go in the front door and you just go directly across the hallway, there is one bathroom there. And then over around here, there's a little house, and there is a little bathroom in there. There are a couple of canvas drop cloths if you guys want to sit in the shade, or you can find places to sit. I'm sorry we don't have tables and chairs for you all. And I guess these are the lunches, and then there are a couple of trash cans in the back.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to walk this gravel road and we're going to look into what we refer to as Westworld. Westworld was very nicely funded by USDA, and Mandy Cash, who is here. Give Mandy a round of applause, please.
Good, Mandy.
Westworld, you wouldn't be able to tell from it, but it was a clear cut just a couple of years ago. And it wasn't just any clear cut. They actually drug all the stumps out and buried them. So it looks awful. I've got pictures if anybody wants to see them. And now it is a gorgeous mix of a short-leaf pine stand and prairie. Eventually it will grow up into a gorgeous short-leaf pine savanna. We will then walk back and look into what Deb has been restoring as a woodland savanna. You might not look at Granny Deb here. Only I can call her Granny Deb, everybody. That's
and
me
it's
and
okay,
RJ only.
actually, it's endearment.
So if you look back there, I often meet people that are like, that sounds like too much work or that's too hard. Granny Deb here has been cutting blackberries and treating stumps of blackberries in her savanna. She has gone above and beyond, and you'll see she is creating some wonderful habitat. Once we get in there, we will be on a trail. It is single file. It is a little bit of a tough hike at some point, so if you don't feel up for a tough hike, feel free to hang out, sit under a tree, drink some water, whatever you want. Once we get further onto the trail, we will get to a point where we will stop and we will overlook a stream terrace, a true forest, and then walk into a savanna remnant. It is a phenomenal snapshot so that you can look at the different ecosystems that all occur here on one property. If we get back in time, we will also look at our restoration in the front that we also did. Well, Deborah did it with roundstone. If not, we will then get back here, grab some water, load onto buses, and get to our last site of the day. So again, please, it may be tough once we get into the woods, but try and stay single file on that line, or at very least, do not step off the trail. Good? Did I miss anything?
Yeah, we
there?
have Nautilus barbatus right at the top of the trail before the remnant, right along the sides. That's the globally endangered plant. We actually have one coming up in the middle of the chert over there, much to everybody's surprise. We're probably not going to go out and try and find that. We have a couple of more Nautilus that have popped up along the way that we will walk by. And you also may notice, if you look at the ground, we burned different parts of the savanna restoration, so you can see the difference between parts that have been manually cleared and burned, parts that have been manually cleared and not burned, parts that we just haven't gotten to yet. And I also want to give out a shout out to Booker Moritz with SGI, who is here somewhere.
Back there, everyone.
Back there, and he has absolutely accelerated the restoration process here with the blackberry abatement. Blackberries are the bane of my existence, and it is an ongoing battle, but we absolutely probably eradicated 60%, 70%, complete kill. So he's the guy to talk to about the best methodology.
Perfect.
Was Westworld planted, or is this just come up from?
It's been planted.
Well, it's a combination of two things. The shortleaf pine area is just shortleaf pines and a couple of native grasses, but 3.5 acres around it was planted with a mix designed by Brittany, who is here somewhere, Brittany Byers, which is a different mix from the front mix, and it's interesting to see what comes up differently. And also, again, much to my surprise, that's not only a recreation, but it's a restoration, because we have the Nautilus coming up, we have the legumes that Theo was talking about, we've got a lot of Lespedeza, we've got a lot of Desmodium, So the whole, I mean, it's just amazing us. Jeremy was actually sort of kind. I didn't do the clear cut, but I completely made a huge mistake by having the stumps taken out and big holes dug so they could burn the treetops. And that's why you see all that chert. I completely destroyed the soil. But that is a mistake that is turning out to be like a happy
Yeah, but when you say you didn't do the clear cut, that was the previous.
Right, the previous owner, we bought this property about 4.5 years ago after our neighbor. This was all forested just like you see around, and he clear cut it, and we were very lucky to get the opportunity to purchase it after the clear cut, so we didn't get the money from the timber. And then because I didn't know any better, I thought, well, I need to pull out all the stumps and seed it like I did the front, because I hadn't gotten enough tutoring from Dwayne yet to know that was a mistake. The last thing I'll say before we go is that everything that you see is directly traceable to Dwayne. It is his fault. 3.5 years ago, I saw him preach at a conference in Chattanooga, and he just preached, and I fell in line, and before I knew it, I was off to the races. I am not kidding. We would not be here today but for Dwayne. So, Dwayne, thank you very much. He gave me my palette, which I had found very late in life.
The flip side is Deborah saved SGI
Yes.
a year and a half ago
She sure did.
when we had an unfortunate staffing situation and somebody had to be let go, and
Deborah stepped in
saved the
as
day.
advisor, counsel,
Interim director of
interim
operations.
director of operations, therapist. I mean, everything you could possibly do.
Thank you.
There might not be no SGI today if it weren't for Deborah
Proposal
Rosenthal.
assistant.
You got it.
Thank you.
Triage specialist.
Round of applause for Granny Deb.
Yeah, right.
That the paint roller fits in, so if it spills over, it's not going to pour out of there. And then one of these inside of there to rub this off on. And you can just walk by the blackberry and just give a little swipe up one side of the stem on each blackberry, and it kills it dead.
Dead, dead, dead.
Dead. Kills bugs dead.
Yeah,
We have done it both with cutting it just to get in there and without.
they were 13 feet tall. So it was a combination of kind of cutting them down so it was more manageable so you didn't completely kill yourself in that.
Booker comes to us from is one of our technicians from Piccadilly Prairie in Illinois, and had worked also with the Nature Conservancy in Nebraska at the Niobrara River Valley, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Platte River Prairie.
Platte River Prairies, got it. Yeah, awesome.
We see a lot of broom sedge, we see a lot of grasses, and in keeping with that COC values or understanding that a ragweed is not as good as some plants. More diversity doesn't always mean better. We have a great example of one of these species here. Deborah, I'm stepping through the prairie.
That's okay. This one you can step through.
We've got two. So here we have rattlesnake master that was put in the mix by B. Byers. You see it's coming up very quick. Yeah. It's coming up very quickly. This is a very high quality plant. It's actually the host plant for the rattlesnake master moth borer, a species that's also being petitioned for listing. Right at my feet here, we also have Helianthus mollis, which these two species here alone outweigh the value of all the ragweed and the broom sedge that you're seeing here. So if you're one of those people here, there's a lot of us that design mixes. Those high value species is really what we're looking for to try and recreate these ecosystems. We can create the structure really easily, but the species like our milkweeds and our host plants, that's what we need in these systems to really restore these prairies.
How long will it take for that to get out-competed by the others, and will it balance out?
It'll have to be not only a mix of it out competing, and it may never balance out. Broom sedge really likes that disturbance. It's, kind of one of those pioneer species. I don't mind broom sedge because it's one of the few things we have at some of our sites that are holdovers, because they can really take a beating. But if we manage this with really that winter season fire and that late, like August, summer, and later on fire, it'll start allowing some of the other grasses to creep in, but also control that grass. Because out here, we're starting to get grass dominated. We've got shortleaf pines out there. We'll burn half of this site this year in the winter. Those shortleaf pines will re-sprout great, and we'll start trying to control the fluctuations of the vegetation out here through fire. Yes.
Do you even think you'll have,
The fire may not carry through the church. It may not, and that's a consider. Deb loves her shortleaf pines, and I keep promising her that they're going to be fine.
what about a growing season burn? Like, why not mix up?
The goal here is ecological restoration.
Okay.
So the entire goal is to create the most accurate prairie here or savanna here that historically occurred. So that variance of fire outside with the historical regime, it's not really going to accomplish the goals we want here.
And the blazing star, the Liatris spicata, they are already coming up here. This was seeded in February 2021. The front prairie was seeded 7 months earlier, and the Liatris is barely coming up there, maybe a couple rattlesnake masters. So these cherty dry areas are responding much better than over the front prairie, even though the front prairie looks more verdant and has more plants per square inch. It's not the really special ones.
And that's a really good point that Deborah just made. I often have landowners ask me before we plant the mix, hey, do I got to fertilize this? Do I have to lime it? Do I need to amend the soil? And these species out here, they're adapted to all types of our native soils here, and they oftentimes do really well in these not ideal farm-tilled soils. And as you see here, we have some of our most conservative species come up here. This is a good example of what I often think about is, me and Dwayne talk about it all the time. I would have loved to see what came up here naturally, because we have a globally rare species responding out of the chert banks. But it's also a good lesson that even when we hit these with a nuke sometimes and mess up terribly, it's never really too late to go back. As long as it's not a concrete slab, we can restore it and we can do some great things with it.
That's that low conservation value stuff, but hey, it's a decent native grass for what it is. But also out here, you do have a lot of other residuals popping up that maybe are get less attention. One of these totally coming back from the seed bank is this little native rush right here, which grows in grasslands. We often think of rushes as growing in wetlands. This is Juncus brachycarpus, which is an upland grassland species. Likewise, there's probably a lot of native upland sedges out here, like the fuzzy wuzzy sedge, which is one of my favorites. They will prolifically come back, and here's why I like them. They often come back naturally, they respond very well, and they form a fairly quick amount of biomass right at the ground level that helps to stabilize the site. But then the other more conservative species still can seed into that fairly readily. So anyways, take a look at this little native that's come back all on its own right there.
I put out a bunch of these in the forest. Wild quinine everywhere, basil leaves, not flowering. You can see right here, right out in the open where it belongs, where it's its home, it is in full bloom right now. And it's a gorgeous flower. You can pass it around if you want.
You'll see it blooming up at the remnant as well, and the leaves are really, really big up there. They're like on steroids up there.
What we're standing in here just a few years ago looked a lot like what we walked through in Montgomery Bell. We had essentially a forest, thick vegetation, thick understory of shrubs, hop hornbeam, all the things that we saw over there. And Deb came through, and with a little bit of my help, a lot of Booker's help, and a lot of contract help, we hack and squirted this, we felled trees, we removed shrubs, and we burned it. And as you can see, we're starting to get that structure that we really like, that savanna structure. We selectively, as we went through here, we picked what I call our champion trees. I oftentimes, when I'm going through these savanna restorations, Deb is very particular, so she won't really do anything without like asking me, which I love. And I would say, okay, we're gonna pick this tree, and we're gonna clear out around it, and we're gonna create a pocket. And then we're gonna pick the next post oak or the next white oak and create this structure here. But this is entirely from a work of love of Deb. Went from a close canopied forest, just nothing but blackberries and hornbeam and just junk 10 foot high, to this gorgeous savanna here. And right here we can see the savanna returning, or the woodland returning. This is Monarda bradburyana, or eastern bee balm. It's a great savanna species, a great woodland species. We have a ton of red-winged milkweed in here. As we get further down the trail, there's just tons of stuff returning in here. Now, they have not let up on the blackberry killing either all throughout here, but you have to appreciate the level of work that a landowner like Deb is willing to do, because we all encounter those people that say, that's too much work, I can't get that much fire in the ground, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, here's Deb doing it, and it looks phenomenal. And if you like deer, or you like turkey, or you like quail, this is your habitat right here. We've got a gorgeous prairie right next to a savanna inclusion. It's phenomenal.
There are a couple of things that I would add. Because I am who I am, as I'm standing right here, I'm looking down and I'm seeing stilt grass. And I'm like, oh shit, I thought I'd gotten rid of all of it. So I will, we use the hunting on X. I will drop a pin so I know to come back and hit the stilt grass. And I do a lot of, I was retired, but now this is a full-time job. So I do put in probably more work than a lot of other people would, or probably even have to, but it's because it's a passion and I love it. So I will be on the lookout for things like stilt grass. And we'll point out, like over in there, Dwayne said it was the largest patch of Monarda bradburyana that you've seen.
Yep.
Last year we found a patch and it was small. So I think with the opening up of the canopy, we're seeing just this explosion of Monarda bradburyana. It's lost its flowers now, so you guys won't be able to see it. And just because we're standing in the shade, I'll point out, when we come around the corner here, you'll see just off of the gravel, the dirt road here, there's an orange flag. That's where we have Anabalis barbatus coming up. Why Anabalis barbatus is coming up there is beyond me. And now that it's getting light, it is probably going to flower. We have a lot that came up in shaded areas that didn't flower, but the one in the middle of the Westfield Prairie flowered. That one's going to flower, and we're also going to walk you by an area where we've got tree protectors around them, because I think one of the reasons why they don't flower a lot is because the deer love them.
Rabbits do too. Rabbits will kill them out.
I have no rabbits.
Well, good for you.
Actually, though, speaking about rabbits, I don't have rabbits either. And growing up, we had a lot of rabbits. I just love to see a show of hands. Anybody here noticed a reduction in rabbits?
I've seen an explosion in rabbits.
You seen explosions?
Yeah, Lincoln
I
County.
haven't seen a rabbit in my yard in 3 years. Quick word about landforms. Theo talked yesterday about where you would expect forest treatment into that. It's on its way to becoming a savanna, right? It looks prairie-ish now, but it wasn't historically a prairie, and it isn't going to be a prairie into the future. We just sort of call it prairie for now, right? It's good, though, for us to start trying as a community to sort of get some standardization of terminology. But back to the landform, we're on the edge of a fairly broad rolling plateau surface here we call the Western Highland Rim. We're near the edge of that, where it begins to break away down into a pretty dissected topography. And so on this sort of rolling upland surface in places that's flat, that's where you would expect the savannas. In the most open, most sort of broadest sections where several square miles of flat land exist, that might be where you would expect these prairie-like inclusions to have existed with almost no trees in the past. We don't have a lot of that here in this county, but it's a little bit. But because we're now shifting into a little bit more topographically heterogeneous landscape, we're going to begin to see the signatures of true woodland. And then very shortly, I mean, this is abrupt. It could be within a span of 50 to 100 feet. We will, in a little bit, get into a true mesic forest. So just be aware of that, the fact that you're on the edge of that rolling landform right here, rolling plateau. Yeah.
This is a slightly north.
Thickets are exceedingly important elements to grasslands and savannas. So while this is not a thicket former, it's still a very important fruit producer, and it's a great pollinator species. But it's going to be a solitary one. But by giving it more sunlight, this species, which is highly adapted to the droughts of Texas and Oklahoma, perfectly native here as well, it's doing great there. It's going to be a really great species. And then on this back edge, you'll see other shrubby species, particularly American hazelnut, which we'll point out elsewhere. Those will all benefit by more light, and their fruit production is going to go up dramatically.
Before we're able to get to it. So it's a hard species to collect. But we actually did the area in the front, the West World Prairie, the first area that we passed. We did a seed introduction out there. It was pretty small scale, but it was kind of experimental. We collected it from a remnant over here that we're going to go visit. We collected seed last year. We planted it in different little plots. We came back last week to look for it. So far, nothing has germinated, but you never know. It could germinate later this year. It could germinate next year. So we'll continue to monitor it. And we'll probably do same plant or something where the seeds might have happened to fall and germinate. But that's I think that's a kind of a frontier for the species, is figuring out what its biology is, because I can't seem to find anything about it online. If anyone happens to know anything, I'd be curious, but that's one of the things that we're working on now. But I think that also is a case for this species in particular, and probably why it's considered globally rare, is if it is monocarpic and it only survives in these tiny little grassland remnants, for a monocarpic species like that, I think it's especially at a disadvantage. And so you have a monocarpic species, the one time in its life that it goes to flower, deers come and eat it, and then it basically wipes out the population. So we're working on it.
Hey, can you guys hear me down there? Perfect. If David can't hear me, it's a good day. So I'm going to try and throw my voice both ways as most possible. But this is a really good site to understand that mosaic of landscapes that we were referring to a bunch yesterday. If we look out in front of us down at that creek terrace, we see a very different ecosystem than this mesic forest on the slope. We turn around and look the opposite direction, we look immediately into a woodland savanna transition zone and remnant. This is what we mean by when we say it's really important to look at your landforms and do forensic biology or forensic botany. If we were to clear this slope or clear that terrace, we would destroy it. We'd obliterate a natural ecosystem. But 10 feet behind us, we have been actively thinning and killing tulip poplars, much to the chagrin of Deborah at times. I remember I was here last winter, and as we go out there, we'll see this giant dead tulip poplar. And we're looking at our feet, and there's all these Nablus barbatuses, which is that globally rare species. And Deborah said, but look at this tulip poplar. And I said, Deb, if that tulip poplar was down the slope or in that terrace, we'd leave it. It's up here in this remnant, it's got to go. We killed that tulip poplar, and this year Deborah came out there and she's sending me pictures of, oh my God, look at all the new Nablus babies that I've got out here. Look at all these rare plants coming up. So it's very important for us that we do not take broad brush strokes through any habitat. When we're doing management and restoration, the way we treat this site or that creek terrace or up top is different. And we have to use that surgical precision, because when we think about public perception, where we lose that fight is when we try and paint too broadly. We got to do the right management in the right place at the right time, or else we're no better than just doing ecological destruction. If we cleared this slope or that terrace, it would be destroyed for good. So really paying attention to your site, knowing the slope, the aspect, how moist it is, what it was like, what it is supposed to be like before we implement management is important. One thing I harp on a lot with my technicians and anybody that I get to mentor is we got to get out of this habit of doing things too fast. I will not recommend management for a site until I've seen it at least twice in different growing seasons. Now, obviously, there's some caveats to that. If I walk into a crop field, I can tell you very easily what to do in that crop field. But if it is not that, we have to slow down, take our time, and do some forensic botany. When we come back here in the fall, for you guys that signed up for the fall trip, this will look entirely different. Get in that habit of trying to see things multiple times before we make decisions on them, and make sure we're paying attention to all the little cues that tell us what the habitat's like.
The other thing that's going on downhill and uphill. We're at the edge of an old clear cut. Everything upslope here has been cleared. All the trees are about the same size. Downslope wasn't part of that cut. So there's things like that overlaid with inherent differences in the soils, the slope, the aspect, etc., that you got to pay attention to, and it might change your management approach.
Absolutely.
Let's say this wasn't clear cut in the recent past. All of this, of course, has been cut at some point in the past, right? But if this wasn't clear cut, there still are indicators here that are very useful to us. We got tree indicators, we have shrub indicators, and we got indicators on the ground. Let's look first at the tree layer. Species like white oak don't really serve as a good indicator because the white oak can go from the base of the slope to the top of the hill and be fine in all instances. The tree, though, that really serves as a good indicator, I'm seeing some down the trail, especially on the left, is northern red oak. Northern red oak is going to be more prominent from here down slope. It's more of a forest species or a closed woodland species. You will get occasionally, in some districts and regions of the eastern United States, there are places, though, where northern red oak defies that and occurs in other kinds of more open scenarios. But here in the eastern region, east central region, generally speaking, red oak is going to be more of a forest species. As far as like subcanopy or shrub species go, it's going to be down here where you're going to see things like spice bush, right? And finally, a lot of us have seen this tall forb that's occurring on the ground. That's black cohosh. Generally speaking, black cohosh is the species that often co-occurs with ginseng and blue cohosh and golden
saw
seal.
some ginseng back there.
Would you see some? Yeah. And so those species are really obligate forest species, and they will occur naturally up until they get to a certain point on the slope. And I would say even before this was cut, they probably would have petered out about where we're standing. All right?
Still look at that remnant.
Let's hit the
There are a
remnant.
couple of orange popsicle sticks towards the top of the trail. Those are nabalus, so you definitely don't want to step on those.
There's also some right here.
There's more.
Throughout this field and we look at our flowering dogwoods, they look fantastic, don't they? Look at them. Gorgeous, full shape when they're flowering, full flower out here. I think that dogwoods really are misunderstood. They've been referred to as a forest species, and I don't really agree with that. When we see these shrubs or small trees in close canopy forests, for lack of a better word, they kind of look like shit. They don't put off a lot of flowers. They're scraggly. Their branches are falling off. This is one of those species that we've misinterpreted, and actually it's probably a savanna species. I see it doing best out here, on these savanna slopes, at Fort Campbell, in the open areas. Where's Booker at?
Right here.
I had to convince Booker of this, but now he believes me, so now you guys gotta believe me too. Because I drove around with Booker and I said, look at that one, and look at that one, and look at that one. And then we went to some forest and I said, man, that looks bad, doesn't it? It's really important that we continue to interpret these things and understand them. We're at a very new age of discovery in Southeastern Grasslands with Dwayne and Theo and SGI and Alan and all these people made me successful in my career, that I stay open-minded. So when Dwayne tells me, hey, I'm not sure that's a forest species, it might be a savanna species, I say, okay, show me. And then when he shows me, I'm like, well, damn, Dwayne, you're right. But also take this. I'm never afraid to challenge Dwayne. I will tell you, I have been right on 3 occasions in my life. I take those to heart. So really use this as an example with these flowering dogwoods of don't always follow the norm. Question things. Anything that I tell you guys, the guys I work with every day, my technicians, they challenge me all the time, and it forms growth. We are really exploring and understanding and doing science and research in these grasslands. We're learning new things every day. So what we know today might be different tomorrow, and just keep an open mind to that stuff.
I was talking, Booker and I went to the store earlier to get some water, and I was remarking about, and I want to say this loosely, tongue-in-cheek, because I'm not sure I got my facts 100% straight, but I think I'm pretty close. On some of the recent public timber events, like at Bridgestone, for example, there were a number of groups that came out in opposition to things like the Bridgestone Savannah project. It may not have been Bridgestone, but it was either that one or another one in the same time period. One of the groups that came out in opposition was the Dogwood Alliance. And I don't want to call the Dogwood Alliance out in a negative form or fashion because I honestly don't know much about their program. But this species though, the dogwood, flowering dogwood, and of course we have like 6 or 7 native dogwood species. This is the best known. But like Jeremy said, it's long been thought of as a forest species. But it absolutely will flower best and fruit best out in this situation. I think that if we can think about that as a way to grow together, maybe we can get the Dogwood Alliance to see some of this, right? Maybe that can be a point of growth. One other point, how do we know? How do we know, other than just my hunch, that, man, you know, dogwood seems to do better in savannas? Y'all know the show Nature that comes on PBS, right? This is brought to you by the Angus Wackenheim Family Foundation, right? And then they show you that picture of like the silhouette of an acacia out in the African Serengeti. Take a look at those dogwoods. They're similar growth form, short, squatty, wide, all the hallmarks of an open grown species. One more thing though, and this is really the nail in the coffin. When the very first Revolutionary War settlers came to Middle Tennessee between 1784, actually 1780, and 1804, before they came, they sent out dozens of land surveyors. Those land surveyors went out to all the parts of the country, from the Kentucky line to the Alabama line over that 25-year period, surveying parts of different properties. If you're a brigadier general, you get 5,000 acres. If you're a private in the Revolution, you got 640 acres. And almost every plot of land included a stream, right? So let's say you were a private in the war and your surveyor came out and they surveyed this as part of that original land grant. They would put one corner of the property here, maybe at this tree. They'd go across the valley to the next ridge and put another point. They'd go down and then back up to create mostly a square. They weren't all square. The point is they wanted there to be a creek in it. But it's those corner posts is where they would say what tree was there, right? They'd say we started at a white oak and went to a red oak and went to a post oak and went to a stake. And they'd put a stake up when there was no tree. So we can map those. In fact, the SGI has just completed mapping 20,000 of those original land grant surveys. And they reveal a really startling pattern. One, lots of stakes, indicating open spaces, lots of post oaks in places. But here's the key. Post oaks often growing right next to dogwoods. And I thought, man, that's a juxtaposition I never quite anticipated. But now it all makes sense. Dogwoods really are an open land species. So I encourage you all, as you go, look at that. See if that reflects reality with where you see it. Look at where your sickest ones are when we go back through the woods, or look where your healthiest ones are. I bet you'll see the same pattern.
It is developed. This is, every year people send me pictures of this and say, what fern did I find here? That's not a fern, that's the basal leaf of the yarrow plant. Yarrow looks like a carrot family thing, but it's in the sunflower family, and I've been seeing it scattered around. This is the slender mountain mint. It's a great savanna and prairie and woodland thing. Everybody knows black-eyed Susan, that's common around here. And this is another good indicator. This is an aster, white flowers in the fall, called Symphiatricum dumosum. I don't know, what's the common name, white aster or something? Yeah. There's about 30 of these in Tennessee.
And we weren't sure how great this remnant's going to be. We still don't know. We're 1 year in, really. We're going to burn it this year. We've obviously been doing hack and squirt. There's the fateful tulip poplar that me and Deborah argued about for an hour. It looks really good today.
It's a great snag.
It is a phenomenal snag. But the point is, we had to really forensically botanize this site, or else we wouldn't have seen the Gentiana villosa wouldn't be there. Half the Nablus wouldn't be out here because it'd be mowed. And this is an example of somebody in our conservation world, we just missed it. We miss things all the time. But that forensic botany and stopping the mowing to out here led us things to see like these pygmanthemums and the black-eyed Susans and all these species that come back. And I'm sure as we get this on a burn regime and we continue to restore it and actively, that's a bug, actively do things here like use reintroduction sites and continue to thin back, we're going to see more and more of these rare species respond. And we can use this kind of as like an idea of what we can do elsewhere in here. Because if this remnant is here, well, we look at the neighbor's property, it's overgrazed, and we look there, that's just a mowed lawn. Maybe I can convince that neighbor to just stop mowing the
No,
lawn.
you'll never convince that.
Hypothetically,
The one's
Deborah.
over. Never.
The one right next door is another remnant. It's got flowering Nablus barbatus in it. It's got Silphium mystericus in it. It's got high quality plants. So not only did finding this remnant lead us to a second remnant, we can take species from that remnant that aren't occurring here and reintroduce them here. And all we've really done is save some money on stopping mowing and spend a little bit of herbicide time and a little bit of time with a hatchet and a drill in our hand. And now we have this wonderfully restored habitat.
We luckily don't have a lot of invasives. We've got some of the Giza. Is that what somebody called it? The Lespedeza?
Yeah.
The bad Lespedeza. But it's not too bad. But we also have a lot of the good grasses. We've got the blue stem. We've got
Little
split
blue
beard.
trim.
Remnant grasslands, the Lespedezas, right, we've been talking about, and Desmodium. There's probably 7 or 8 native Lespedezas. In this field alone, there's probably 3 or 4 species. In terms of Desmodiums, there's probably 15 species. Out in this one site, there's probably at least 3 or 4. If you get into a high quality remnant, it's easy to get 7 of these and 10 of these, right? Very important contributors to biodiversity.
You want to talk about quail food.
And very important, absolutely. And in terms of a grassland indicator, this is as good as it gets. This is called the Maryland tick trefoil, Desmodium marylandicum. And yes, by God, Maryland had grasslands too. Where did he get that name? I'm not sure exactly. But the bar down the street, up until when I came to this area first in probably, I don't know, 2001, there was a bar down there called the Piccadilly Bar. But the name Piccadilly also appears on museum specimen labels from the 1880s. So this has been referred to as Piccadilly for a long time. How do we know that? At the University of Tennessee are pressed and dried specimens of plants. And the state's first botanist, a German by the name of Augustine Gattinger, would hop the train. And before there was an official U.S. Highway 70, this was the very first road across the state. They call it the Broadway of America. But before that even, there was a railroad that was probably put in the 1840s, maybe 1830s, 1840s, that aligns with this a little bit to the north. Augustine Gattinger would hop on that train, and he would use the train to go out to Carroll County, and he'd go down across the Cumberland Plateau. He'd get off at the mountain at Suwannee. He'd use it to go all the way to Ducktown in the Copper Basin. So he used the train as his network. When he got off here, he said barbed rattlesnake root, a plant that Deborah and everybody's been calling Nablus all day, right? Which we'll see here too. That's one of the specimens that he collected, first time ever documented from Tennessee, and it would have been somewhere around here. We don't know the actual original location of where he was. When he came through in the 1880s, most of these broad uplands that we're driving through today between here and Montgomeryville would have been open savannas, right? So when, fast forward to about 100 years, maybe 75 years later, you got experts out of the University of Tennessee who are roaming across the state looking for remnant prairies. Dr. Hal DeSalm, who worked from the 50s through the 90s, was the one who kind of brought Piccadilly Prairie back onto everybody's mind. He stopped and found it, and that's the original site right over there. You see that little clearing in the woods. So whenever I was introduced to that, I followed Dr. DeSalm's written descriptions, parked right here on the side of the road. At that time, there was no lake. This was all forested. This would have been a wall of forest, and this is just a highway. And that was about a 2-acre open gravel barren, all right? Several years go by, I brought a class down with me to teach them the ecosystems of Tennessee, and I'm all hyped up, excited to show it to them. all hyped up and excited to show them Piccadilly Prairie. I walk into it, guess what it is? A food plot. Somebody had gone in and plowed up the last of this gravel barren, and it instead put in a food plot into that space, into that location. Needless to say, I was highly pissed because it's the last of its kind. But the person that did that didn't know any better. They didn't know that that was the last remnant oak savanna grassland remnant of this region. So it disappeared. Several years go by, I come out, and then we've got this. I'm like, geez. It's just chipping away, right? But this guy is a really nice guy. Jeremy works with him closely. He's really conscientious about conservation. He's worked closely with Mandy and Chase Coakley and others. And by the signs on his fence, you can tell he's committed to conservation. So when Jeremy started coming out here and he brought this little remnant to his attention, the landowner didn't know the significance of that strip. He said, man, I'm glad you told me, thank you. And now we're sort of putting all the pieces together of things that have been building in place. So what happened to that final remnant? Again, food plot. Now I think there's what do we see over there? It's just a big field, right?
Yeah.
But all those woods over there have remnant potential all in them. This guy's woods behind it, lots of remnant potential. So this is like another epicenter of possibility. And if we, with Quail Forever and NRCS,